Satish, you can start.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Satish Mahajan. Extremely happy to welcome all our participants and the fellow Gurukul members. And another need of ours, security is part of and parcel of life today, right? What we are trying to do today is we are going to talk, we are discussing with two veterans of the industry. One is Comrade Sanjeev and Kiran, who are part of Birlasoft and Agon Life. Okay, and they are going to cover. They are going to talk about. Just a minute, I lost the link. They are going to cover about the shift left security to secure code to cloud. Okay, over to looking forward some thought-provoking discussions during this session. Over to Vijaya for take it ahead.
Thanks, Satish, for this quick and wonderful introduction. Let me have this special mention that Satish, being a CyberGurukul core member and has actively participated in every aspect making CyberGurukul what it is. And we will be equally happy to have also inputs from CyberGurukul core members, Srinivasan, Sasank, Jagdishwaran, and Anil in between. Now it's time to applaud the valuable presence of our ever-supportive participant friends. Kudos to all of you who have made CyberGurukul a fast-growing community. Hope we will together celebrate many more festivals, together enable, engage, and empower as community. Today, must also say, looking forward to grab all the learnings I can get through Cyber heroes of today's session, Mr. Sanjeev and Mr. Kiran. Let me request Hers, who is a known face for this community and the founding member of CyberGurukul, who is going to moderate this session. So Hers, request you to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijaya and Satish. Firstly, let me just confirm again, the screen is visible as well as I'm totally audible.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, it's definitely an amazing start that Satish, the core member of CyberGurukul, and Vijaya, the co-founder of CyberGurukul, has given us. So thank you so much for that. And let me concur at this point for all the lovely CyberGurukul members out here. Here's a message from for you guys out here. CyberGurukul, the very existence, you all are the foundation of it, and we owe all the accomplishments, whatever little achievements we could do till now, and whatever we are going to do coming forward. It's all because of you, with the support that you have extended. And yes, we will be continuing to expect that going forward as well. And at this point, let me now warmly welcome our respected speakers, Mr. Kiran and Sanjeev. Sanjeev, Kiran, working with you for this session, I do understand you have kind of really juggled out the time, and somehow managed to grace this platform today. It genuinely means a lot to us. In fact, we are actually, each one of us is very keen, excited to leverage, grab all the learnings, those real life examples, and those thought-provoking insights that you will be giving us in this journey of shift left security, secure code to cloud. But yeah, before that, I would love to hear your views. Let's first start with Sanjeev. Over to you.
Thanks, Ash. Good evening, everyone. Happy to see, and I'm happy to be here. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's always good to interact with fellow community members who are riding the same bus as us, and also hopefully contribute back to the community and try and discuss issues that is affecting all of us as we move forward in our cyber defense and securing our organizations. So really happy to be here, first of all, and thank you for this opportunity. Also going forward, look forward to keep engaging with the community, keep learning from all of you as well, and hopefully contributing it back. So when I was initially approached and given this topic, initially I was scared, to be very, very frank, but then I realized, yes, this is an awesomely good topic to discuss few things. I have some thoughts, and especially if you consider this, now shift left security, code to cloud for me is about securing your applications better. It's not that we're not doing it today. In fact, the topics and the LinkedIn advertisement said DevSecOps along with three idiots. And I thought it was very, very well picked because security even today or application development even today does include each of those three idiots. It's just that somehow they're not aligned properly. And that's why, like in the movie, they end up getting into trouble and do not get the desired outcomes. So this is a good and important topic, I thought, and that's why look forward to having great discussions with Kiran and others. For me, security in applications today looks quite disjointed from how we secure our, say, perimeters, our networks, our infrastructure. Uh, because if you look at how traditional the other security regimes have come along, the network security, infrastructure security, they have always been on the left. In fact, there is a move there to say shift right now. That is, do not only detect at point of entry, but try and detect as the attacker moves along till they achieve their final objectives. Whereas on the application side, it has always been towards the right, if it existed at all. In fact, rightmost. So you had your plan, build, commit, pre-prod, quality testing, production, and then security in form of, say, annual penetration test or vulnerability analysis, etc. As a result, uh, the outcomes from this entire exercise or the framework were probably not desirable. Security in this area, application development, was always more from a compliance driven thing rather than trying to achieve the best possible thing. And with cloud technologies coming in, sharing of responsibilities, that changes the paradigm quite a bit. So I look forward to engaging discussions on these areas. Thank you, Harsh, for this. Thank you.
Well, Sanjeev, a salute to your spirit, and I think you quite a bit covered the gist of what we are going to do today. So yes, it's going to be a really interesting session, and we are going to be well supported by Kiran as well. Kiran has been, you can say, associated with CyberGurukul for a very long time, and this time we could somehow, kind of catch hold him so that he could join us as a speaker. Kiran, we are equally excited to have you. Let's, hear a few thoughts of you before we actually, come back to the session.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Harsh, Satish, and Vijay. Thanks for having me out over here while I was a silent observer or participant out over here. So yeah, first of all, thanks, and thanks, Sanjeev, for being part of this engagement. So this is first of all, I would also like to see. I see there are quite a good audience out over here, and I hope all of them are in a good health as well in this situation. So for me, I think this is a very what we all do is a very serious business. Security is a very serious business, to be very honest. And but this topic specifically, shift left, DevSecOps, is very close to my heart. And this journey for all of us, it's quite new from the initiatives perspective. Most of the organizations are taking this up, and with, if you really look at what Sanjeev was talking about, actually I would say there is no perimeter right now as we speak. It's a completely a borderless environment what we are going to see. right now with thanks to digital transformation and thanks to the cloud adoption, which has been happening at a very sharpening peak. But if you look at all the new cloud native applications, cloud native stack, if you see, these are entirely perimeterless. So which has given, as I was talking about startups or digital transformation initiatives, this have really scaled very sharp perspective, the way the applications are being also been developed. So gradually we'll catch it up in terms of, but the security controls now has become, I would say, a non-negotiable or inseparable at this stage. So that's where I was talking. It's a very serious business, and traditional security does not work always the way it used to work earlier in the earlier waterfall method. In the agile world, you have to manage it very differently. So I think gradually, as we discussion take forwards, I think let's have an engaging discussion out over here. Thanks, Bhatt, for having me out over here, Harsh.
Definitely, Kiran, the pleasure is all ours. And yes, security definitely, as you said, is a serious business, and we are seeing quite a bit of a transformation. That's the story today. And yes, your passion is also totally visible, Kiran. So definitely, we are going to love all of us out here the session. Yes, so before we go forward with Sanjeev and Kiran and dig deeper into this session, I just thought I want to share a message out here. This month, in fact, is a very special month because every year we live some very important events. We celebrate the victory of good over evil, over evil. I'm sorry, and we also stress upon the importance of diversity. Taking inspiration from this, we also want to extend this to our industry and take a wow at CyberGurukul. Well, it's a little different than what you're thinking. At CyberGurukul, we want to break the bias and take the charge. In terms of our industry bias, what I mean to say is cybersecurity, which thankfully, as you know, it's a story which has started today. Cybersecurity today has been, been visioned as an enabler to the business. Equally, we need to break this bias that it may not complement the speed of this. It definitely can. It can promote inclusiveness, and it's doing that. User security, productivity, experience can definitely go hand in hand. And above all, we will be fighting against the cybersecurity as an afterthought disease today. We'll make a very significant step today by shifting security left. And that's the story we will be living with the expertise and treasured insights of Sanjeev and Kiran. If I talk about the current scenario, what's actually happening today, I don't know if it's exactly post-pandemic situation. I think that is something I'll leave it to all of you to decide. But this rapid digitization induced, or maybe you can say magnified threat actors. Of course, we concur that it has reached to a different level of maturity. Hackers today, they have much more advanced, innovative, fast-paced than they were before. The way they are deploying malware and exploits, it's definitely unimaginable and at a massive scale. Now let's imagine, which we have kind of seen around us. There have been a lot of examples around us. If this is what this malwares were inserted into the application at the build phase, and it remains undiscovered till it gets distributed to thousands of the customers. What a disaster this is. And these are the disasters we have been bombarded with continuously. That's how I think we all have been pressed with all the security professionals, the business leaders. We have this responsibility to build a comprehensive security strategy which can actually understand, detect these cyber risk at the early stage, right? So that we can pursue this digital initiatives with confidence, with speed and security. This is a time we will have to also respond and remediate to these incidents before they can actually impact the business, it can impact its users and other stakeholders. I'm sorry, just a second. Yeah. And that is the reason shifting security to the left is a solution to securing code to the cloud. At CyberGurukul today, we will actually address cyber risk from the build to the runtime to the distribution phase. And for this, of course, we are here to welcome not only our modern heroes, DevSecOps, but much beyond that. We will also address those myths, kind of debust them, come across some jargons and maybe buzzwords that we should be aware about, and also dig deeper into the what and how of shift left security. And Sanjeev and Kiran has already started this journey with us. Let's now first break the bias with Sanjeev again and break the bias we are seeing against cyber security with shift left security. So Sanjeev, over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and a wonderful introduction to the topic. And like you rightly said, a couple of points I felt were very, very interesting. If you look at the cyber attacks overall, not only application-based attacks, as you could say, fathom from the Verizon's DBIR report, data breach investigation report, which as of 2021, the latest report that is available, it says about 40% of all cyber attacks in the world, right? The main thing was hacking. And of course, there are other things, but 40%, the majority is hacking. And within that 40%, 80% of all hacking is through web applications, right? That means you're discussing 32% of all cyber attacks in the world are targeting web applications. And with the rapid digitization, digital transformation that is happening everywhere, I fear this number is only going to grow up because, like you rightly said, when we were growing up, started reading cybersecurity, I mean, they were used to be classic slides, right? Who are the threats? And there used to be virus, Trojans, and script kiddies. Well, those script kiddies are long gone now, right? Now you have nation state actors, financially motivated, hands-on keyboard, actor groups. They're like enterprises nowadays, those ransomware as a group or malware as a service kind of actors, right? So now you're now dealing with enterprise versus enterprise. It's no longer application versus one threat actor, etc. So yes, I'm not trying to scare everyone. The world is scary. In fact, if you look at, and then you mentioned those supply chain attacks, the SolarWinds attacks late 2020. As a consumer, you couldn't do anything because the code or the malware was inserted right at the coding phase itself within the creator of the product, and then everybody else was just using the product, got it through an official patch, right? You couldn't do anything. Similar supply chain attack, the Kaseya attack of 2021. Again, that impacted a large number of organizations because the application was targeted at MSSPs primarily. Right? And last but not least, the Log4j. Entire world took notice of that because it was very, very pervasive. Even it was not readily apparent at that time because there were many commercial softwares which were using that library in the backend. There's no easy way to detect them unless they came up, and then they came up with their own solutions. It took a couple of months for everyone to come up to speed on that. And the worst was the day it became public. From that day, if you looked at the Shodan traffic, the threat actors were doing crazy scanning all over the internet, right? They were building up, preparing for that attack, trying to identify those vulnerable machines across the globe to say, all right, as and when exploit becomes available publicly or privately, now they have this pool of vulnerable servers or vulnerable machines that they can easily go and target. Right? So we are dealing, or we are living in this world where the speed of attack is very, very high. In fact, CrowdStrike in their report, if you see, they do this threat a report every year. And they measure a term called breakout time, which is time from initial infection to lateral movement. And that they're measuring the breakout times in as low as around 90-92 minutes, right? That's the time we have as defenders to maybe either stop, if cannot stop, detect and respond. Otherwise, the attackers have the upper hand. So that's the pace of attack. That's the threat that we're dealing with. And if we still rely on annual pen testing to protect our web applications, yeah, that's a big disconnect, right? So, like Kiran rightly said, the modern ways we have to now be aligned to the threat, take a risk-based approach, and break the bias between dev, sec, and ops. Typically, you take an enterprise, even if they have these three teams, the developers, they develop the software, hand it over to the operations guy to run and maintain. And then somewhere, the biased side of it, the security guys, right? The most hated people. They are aligned at some point of time, either internally or through third party, to come and test it out and then identify vulnerabilities. Even when they identify misconfigurations or vulnerabilities and go back to those teams, half the time they are not even looked at, or probably not the amount of right seriousness impact imparted to it. Because guess what? The developers have already moved on to probably the next project, right? They think is the ops guys will do it. Ops guys think no, developers will do it. And it all depends upon what kind of program the organization has. Is there any process to break the silos between these three teams, right? How collaborative they are. And these are the problems I see. This is the bias I see today in typical application development or application scenarios, where each team working in their own silos, each team thinking they're doing what is required to be done for themselves, and each team does not understand what is the role of the other team. So even if you look, the security team takes out a report, does whatever they have to do from contextualization, enrichment, and then send it out. Now, if they send out a detailed report, they say, "Oh, just tell me the findings," right? And so finally, what goes is an Excel sheet with a list of this is the finding and this is what you should do. And developer looks at it mostly from an audit or a compliance perspective. It says, okay, so I need to do this in my application, and they go ahead and do it without even understanding why did this problem even occur in the first place. So without doing that root cause, without understanding the context of this observation, it's simply looked at, okay, here is an auditor, the security guy who's found an observation. I need to close it as quickly as possible so that my application is clear to function in production. And that's the bias I see. And going forward, like Kiran was saying, unless we break this bias between dev, sec, and ops, we will be in a lot of trouble.
I think very, very relevant point out here and quite deep dive we could do. Of course, Sanjeev, I do concur with the pace of the cyber attacks, how they have advanced and really, have this exponential transformation. You could give us some very good examples of the different phases, in fact, the supply chain attacks, the vulnerabilities like Kasaya, SolarWinds, Log4j, and definitely, the speed of the attack is something which we are really worried about. The disconnect and the gap. Unless we do not align the risk, we do not break the bias with DevSecOps. We do not break the silos as a business itself together. This journey will definitely become difficult. But the good news is that all of us are discussing this and actually understanding the root cause analysis and trying to move forward. I think Sanjeev, great start. Let's now get to Kiran and hear his initial thoughts. What does come in your mind when you hear ship-left security?
See, I'll start with the business perspective. While I was talking about the business transformation, cloud adoption, and cloud is one of the very important pillar for the digital transformation perspective. It is completely changing the way applications are being developed. In fact, in one of the surveys I was looking at, 66% of the respondents were leveraging cloud for the innovation, the cloud native apps for the customer experience improvement perspective. And to deliver this experience, DevOps is becoming the de facto standard. And if you really look at from a DevOps perspective, the changes are been functionally been tested at a very large scale. Small developments are being developed, or they have been released in very small sprints. So gone are the days when we used to have the monolith applications and we used to follow the waterfall approach, where the changes used to come once in a month, once in a quarter. With the adoption of the modern applications like microservices or API based applications, the frequency, the velocity of the changes has largely increased this thing. And which has further increased, as I was saying, the attack surface as well, because everything is, every API, every microservices has become now the perimeter. If you look from, because it is not only that it is the organization who's developing it, who is only working on it, but we in this independent or the dependable world, we are actually sharing our APIs, we are consuming other APIs. Everyone is the consumer or the service provider in this space. So I think that's where the security team should not become a bottleneck of this. If the same changes and velocities are going at such a large scale, obviously that calls out how do we get a security team involved at very early stage, provide early feedback to ensure that the engineering team is actually getting the early feedback and they are moving faster, and while they are also innovating as well. So I think, and if you also look at the recent, I was just looking at what while these changes are going at such a large scale with the velocity perspective, but 80% of the code is actually been reused, copied from the internet the way it is. It is hardly 20% is where the customization is made, because normally these libraries are available on the open source stack. Someone can just consume it and start reusing it, and no one is sure about what kind of a security loopholes, backdoors these libraries are carrying out. So that's where I think, and if you really look around from the scale perspective, uh, and if you look at from this traditional monolith, the security testing used to go from a week to a month to a quarter as well, depending upon the complexity of the application perspective. I don't think security team would ever have that opportunity now when the business wants to go so fast, and security team can become a bottleneck. And that's where the shift left. DevSecOps, where the development, operations, and the security needs to come together and have this process integrated and have the virtual guardrails deployed in your ecosystem, in your application workflow, in the CI/CD pipeline, which will ensure that things are in a largely automated way rather in a manual way.
I think you quite hit the nail, Kiran. In fact, why shift left security is something very well covered by you. And of course, when you talk about the way business has transformed, the cloud adoption at a lightning speed, it has changed how the applications can be developed. The kind of experience out it is here is really changing. And this is
I will
why,
just
please,
also use one analogy,
please.
since we are all going through this Russia and Ukraine war, and kind of an analogy, if we want to put it in terms of, like, if you look at any kind of a country defense, if there stops any incoming missiles, then it is called like a security operations, I would say. But if the defense force identifies the vulnerable key location that can be targeted and protected before the attack happens automatically, I think that is something which we can talk about DevSecOps, uh, courtesy to a lot of news channels, I should give.
I think, Kiran, this is like just a wow factor. The kind of analogy of incoming, missiles versus security, and Russia and Ukraine definitely gives us a very good example of,
Yeah.
what can happen with and without DevSecOps. I think lovely example, and I also, very well thought about this adoption. We are no more living in times of a waterfall approach where we have weeks or months. It's now the continuous development and continuous integration, like you said, the CI/CD pipeline. That is the need, and security definitely cannot be perceived. And if we also have to do some work out here, it cannot be treated as a bottleneck. It cannot be an afterthought now. It has to come out early. So I think we are having very interesting conversation kind of here, and Kiran has also given some amazing inputs. I'll now open up to all my uh, audience friends over here. So we are discussing so much about DevSecOps, chip-left security. I'm sure you would have come across some myths or some gaps, and you, with your experience, you will have explained to your other friends how this need to be debusted. I would really love to hear out the inputs from everyone out here. You can either put it on a chat box, and I would definitely prefer you can raise your hands and answer this verbally. What what are those myths that you think have been debusted in times like today in terms of shift left security and DevSecOps and maybe anything else? Let me just check. Okay. All right. No worries. In that case, I think Kiran and Sanjeev will definitely help us over here. Let's now dig deeper into the fundamentals. And let me, this time come back to you, Kiran. We have been discussing so much about how we can actually ensure that security is coming up early. But how do we actually ensure that this, shift left security, DevSecOps, it can be actually palatable, it can actually be absorbable to our business stakeholders. Because if we have to break the silos in this DevSecOps and shift left, we will have to break it also as a business.
Yeah, so I think in I would just take a framework perspective, or from before that, I think if you look out, I mean seeing this very largely that whenever there is an idea, and that idea needs to go live in 30 days, and that's kind of days we are looking at. And if you look at the overall framework, if you look at from planning to coding, build, test or package, release and operate, and then monitoring it out in the entire eco cycle, I think 30 days, unless and until you're an agile, you'll never be able to look at it. And when you say agile, and if you also look at the AWS two pizza team as well, I think that's where these all agility, where you have a good collaborative working. There are no silos. This thing, there is an engaging engineering culture, which with the open mindsets and standards. And this has also, from a business perspective, it is like it is a customer led and not a tech led kind of this thing. And this gives kind of, from a business perspective, and very different experience this thing. So one is from the internal team, internal organization perspective, and obviously, so we take it from largely in terms of the customer perspective. How, what if you are a customer, what is your expectations? Because end of the day, you will not have all the resources out to be available to do each and everything. You have to do the prioritization, you have to have an MVP perspective concept. So that's where it gets started, and that's once it is agreed and everyone works towards that perspective, that's where this all comes. And if you look out from the security aspects in this, while if you see the pace, it does not make sense that security holding this from a security perspective as part of it. It basically, security needs to act as an advisor to the developers and to the ops team. It is, security actually becomes the developer responsibility. So that's how it should really work out. So I think these are the concepts which really makes a very sustainable kind of a change, and it's a cultural change. It's not going to see, and it is there is no secret sauce which could while we discuss it, it's a cultural thing, and it takes a lot of efforts, persistency in terms of the leadership team perspective from the tech and non-tech as well, which would take the organization to the next level.
I think, Kiran, very well put by you. When you have to, kind of make an idea live in 30 days, that actually kind of covers the challenge from this framework, build, design, runtime, operation, the whole eco cycle, like you mentioned, and doing that in 30 days. I was just thinking, how is that actually possible? But yeah, that
And
is
if you see, as we speak, you never know if these larger social media, if you look at those platforms, look at the changes. Every minute there is a release which happens, and that is a scale. I think a lot of business team, the CEOs are watching them, are following them, and it becomes, and obviously any kind of a practicing professional like me, you will always be challenged out to put things out in such a large pace. Obviously, at least not that, but whatever that pace come out to be, because there's a lot of difference which the organizations, specifically BFSI and the tech-enabled organizations, are already seeing it, and if we are seeing it in their startup as well. People are trying to adopt a startup kind of a culture, and every business, if you ask me, every business is now talking about that. It is like a tech company selling goods, tech company selling banking, tech company selling insurance. So that's how you will see going forward.
I think what you said, scalability and speed are like big promises that are on these, modern cyber heroes, I can say, and real life, heroes like Kiran and Sanjeev out here. So I think definitely a big task. And I think you did come out with some very, interesting points here, which everyone will agree. Now, we want to break the silos. Of course, the goal is the customer expectation that everyone wants to meet, the dev, tech, ops, and prioritization as per that customer expectations definitely helps. And like Sanjeev had mentioned about getting aligned, that disconnect. I think this is definitely that objective that we all will be connected about. And security definitely needs to be an advisor to the developer. And of course, we talk about DevSecOps. It's not DevSecOps. It's a philosophy. It's a process, and we all are working towards this sustainable cultural change. It's not exactly a goal. So yes, it's going to be a ever going process in itself. Sanjeev, let's come to you now and hear your thoughts. We actually kind of started digging upon those challenges, in the adoption of shift left, or maybe in terms of the DevSecOps. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. So I try and continue from where Kiran left off. And I think Kiran brought in some extremely valid points. And one of the things was, I think, about the pace of development, right? And increased or enhanced focus on customer expectations, or at least trying to meet those expectations. And in between, if you see all of this, whether we traditionally we're in waterfall model, or even those organizations that have started adopting agile or DevOps, uh, and DevOps, like from its origin in around 2009, it's only now that it is picking up steam, right? And guess what? For last 10 years, I mean, nobody talked of security in DevOps. It's only around 2019 then people start realizing, as the adoption of DevOps started increasing, CI/CD came into picture, and you no longer had a start point, right? It became more like a horizontal 8 and infinity kind of a thing. There is no start point. So the application development is happening continuously, testing, release, patch happening continuously. And Kiran lightly mentioned there are certain organizations now extremely agile. Um, I have heard of names like Netflix, Amazon, and few others who are probably doing tens and hundreds of deployments a day, right? Now, if you follow the traditional model of building your code, doing QA testing, giving it to security, and then security testing it, taking its own sweet time, you're not going to have this kind of agility and flexibility. And if you don't have these two, you don't have let's say, the capability to be able to meet those customer expectations, right? And this is where I think the reason why security was always given a shorthand was probably two myths, and you did talk about myths earlier, Harsh. Time and cost. Traditionally, security took time. The reason is the security engineers are not application developers. They don't have that context. They understand risk, they understand threats, they understand vulnerabilities. They do not understand application development all the time. There may be few, of course. And the application developers are not security engineers. They know how to develop applications, good quality applications, develop it quickly. That's where they have been trained. You go look back at the college curriculums for students doing computer science. I mean, there is focus on application coding, but is there a focus on secure coding? Probably not much, at least not traditionally. Of late, if it has started, I don't know. But during my interaction with those who are coming in fresh into the workforce, I didn't find much of an exposure or even an awareness of secure code development. Right? And as a result, now security is always something to be added on later. So people know what they do. So we can't blame those people, of course. But the fact is, today it doesn't meet that requirement of without context, the dev team, the security team, the sec team, the ops team, they all work in a very adversarial fashion. When a security engineer comes back to the developer and says, boss, you can't go to production because of this, and that guy is already on the defensive, right? I spent so much time developing this application, and now this crazy guy comes in and says, I need to do this. This because he doesn't understand the impact, doesn't understand the risk that that particular decision, or maybe using an open source library, or maybe using something particular causes to the application. And Kiran did hint at it. Modern applications are very, very different from those traditional monolithic applications, right? You have loads and loads of API, you have loads and loads of integration. During runtime, reach out to other libraries, pull data, pull. So there is a lot more dynamic or dynamics to modern applications, a lot more moving parts. Instead of big application, you have a set of modular, I would say, containerized things talking to each other, east, west, north, south, etc. And then suddenly those traditional security methods of taking one chunk and testing it in whole does not apply anymore. So security also needs to become more agile. Along with shift left, it has to become part of development and use the tools that a developer is comfortable with. So you can't introduce new controls, new things, cannot introduce delays, cannot introduce cost. And these are the two myths. Security actually, Harsh, you mentioned earlier, is an enabling thing, right? You can actually save costs because there's a lot of research that has happened in the past which says if you detect a security flaw at the end, when the code is ready for production, cost is unbearably high. Whereas if you're able to detect something during the planning phase, during the design phase, it's probably 10 times, 100 times cheaper to mitigate those risks at that point of time. And take a simple example. I'll just quickly wind up with simple example. You need to say, take in username and password, right? So you need a text box, and that text box could be open to, if not done properly, a lot of injection vulnerabilities, right? SQL injection, cross-site scripting, etc. So one way is let the developer do what he or she wants to do, and then at the end go and test it out. And then if you identify a vulnerability, go back to the developer and say, all right, you're not doing say input validation properly, etc., etc., etc. If the the developer is good, they'll probably do it. If they do not even understand this concept, they'll say, so what? And take a different approach, which is to say security and developer working together during the design phase and says, here you need a login screen. If you need a username, it should ideally be just alphanumeric of a certain length maybe, and so you do not allow other types of inputs to come in, etc., etc. Validate that input, and then once you have that design, create your test cases based on that, right? So at the end of it, when you're doing security, if you've done your test cases, now you can have it as an integrated continuous security and not allow the developer to make that mistake in the first place, right? So use those control gates between the various stages of development, implement those short modular security checks right at the beginning based on test cases that were defined during the design phase itself. And so now the onus and responsibility of security falls on the developer. They do understand what is their responsibility or what is the impact or the risk of their decisions that they take at that point of time. And hopefully this is what a shift left looks like, right? Working together, collaborative, contextualizing each and every aspect of roles of various people involved in this orchestra, so that the final output is like a music and not 40 instruments playing their own thing.
I mean, these are some extensive inputs, and you actually have covered how security can be a real enabler. Working together, the collaboration and contextualizing together instead of having new tools, how we can actually collaborate the current tools. In fact,
Harsh, I'll
yes,
I'll
Kiran,
just take another analogy
please,
uh,
love to have that.
of doctors. Like if you look, they always talk about prevention is better than cure. So just like building a healthy practice similar for our DevOps or DevSecOps also helps to build the security early, do the sanitization of code, scan the CI/CD pipeline at the build stage rather than looking at a cure when the major attack happens at the runtime. I think that's something which I could just correlate what Sanjeev was also talking about.
I think a very, very lovely, beautiful analogy of the doctors, right, Sanjeev? The DevSecOps being the prevention
Oh,
better
absolutely.
than cure.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And you also mentioned about this is the way to sanitize and, of course, the continuous integration, continuous development. We'll definitely come back, Kiran. I think lovely analogy here. Uh, yes, but to also continue, like what Sanjeev mentioned about, why till 2019 we did mention about DevOps, which even Kiran covered a few minutes back, but security actually came up a bit later in this time and cost. And I think we did quite a bit dig deeper into this, and not only about time and cost. Traditionally security, of course, traditionally security professionals were not application developers and vice versa, but for an added context, I think, and to break this kind of you can say this cycle, we need to being mentioned, to work together, collaborate and contextualize together. And we did cover how we are really transforming today, that security needs to be part of the development. Secure coding is the practice that we need to follow today. And of course, a dynamic world, we have so many more concepts to understand about containerization, microsegmentation. This is definitely making security also maybe more agile. And like Kiran and Sanjeev mentioned about the social media and Netflix, I think, yes, we can definitely get inspired from that. And I think, we are discussing so much. We had this wonderful analogy also by Kiran, and, a good dig deeper you know, into this journey by Sanjeev. Let's now talk a little more on the road ahead and the adoption. And Kiran, let me come back to you again on this. When we talk about DevSecOps, shift left security, I think Sanjeev also did quite a justice there. What are those business use cases? How do we actually, apply that? How do we do that in terms of the shift left security?
So there are a couple of so when we talk about shift left in the uh, uh, basically nothing but integrating all these security tools into your CI/CD pipeline. So whether if you look at from a quality assurance, again your continuous planning, continuous development or a continuous integration, continuous deployment, and a continuous testing and monitoring perspective. I think all these tools, if you see the modern DevOps tools, these all are getting it as part of these category itself. And as part of that, I think integrating all those right, and there is no silver bullet. Honestly, I have not seen it. While I believe in silver bullet, but unfortunately, there is nothing called silver bullet in this framework, security framework. So you'll always see the best of the components, which would be like, if you look at, we call it software composition analysis. While I was talking about 80% of the code is coming from the libraries which are available on the open source perspective, and developers would like to reuse them. So that's where the software composition analysis is something which we can come across. You have a software application source code testing perspective, the SaaS solution. So I think that is something which we can get it integrated. You'll also see a DAST, dynamic application source code testing perspective, and then you have a runtime protections. So these all, if you look at from the entire journey, so along with this, there are also a couple of other things which will come into picture. If you look at with these adoptions of cloud technologies, you also need to have from the posture management perspective. So you need to have a cloud posture management in place, process in place, how you could do, because it's not about, it needs to be in real time or a near real time perspective, because you just can't see something as your S3 is in public and you have to wait for a long time to detect it and then to respond, because here the detection is very important. And equally the response time for that incident or the event perspective. Other is your workload protection perspective. So I think this is an overall ecosystem, if you see, which is very much this thing. And if you see going forward, most of the cloud breaches are going to be the human errors. That's going to be the configuration issues are going to be the large cause of the data breach. Hence, these misconfigurations needs to be managed by a continuous compliance check. So these are a couple of things. I think these are the solutions which need to get integrated with your process, with your CI/CD pipeline, so that it ensures that the right things are being delivered, and you have those gates configured, guardrails at certain in case, and place it to an acceptable limit. Maybe it is, you cannot do it on day one, because you will see most of your application deliveries are failing because of these. So maybe you have to put it in the detection and then get into the prevention mode perspective. I think these are a couple of things. Yeah, another is on the developer first approach as well. So getting into we all seen the great resignation this year, last 2 years we have been observing around. So I think that is something which we need to give as far as possible. How do you ensure that, because developer wants to innovate, developer wants to move fast, and how do you help them to achieve that is something. If you could help them, I think that's something which I'm also, while the vision is that to ensure that the organization become a developer first, ensuring that we give early feedback, right feedback, so that to avoid rework and to ensure that even the and whatever support we could do in terms of the early stage to the development. I think that's something. These are some key areas which would ensure that the productivity is improved and security do contribute towards the developer perspective as well.
Kiran, I, I, I could really not imagine how important this approach could be, how you've connected with the great resignation about the developer first approach, and the frustration that these developers can have. Maybe, of course, we can actually help them with this DevSecOps approach, with that early feedback, like you mentioned, so that that energy, that time actually is not getting wasted to a level. They
Right.
should innovate faster, and they should be able to adapt faster as well. Okay, they need to innovate faster, and we need to adapt faster. Maybe it's this way that
One thing, I was just having a discussion with one of the I would say unicorn founders. I think we were discussing around that nothing should reach out to the developers unless and until you really need. So before even reaching out these requirements, because engineering team bandwidth is the most expensive bandwidth in the entire ecosystem. So if you are getting something to build from them, I think it has to be gone through a couple of thought process, guardrails coming around, because that itself talks about how critical is the bandwidth. While it is not related to a security, but you can just imagine the kind of the expensive the engineering team, whether you talk about front end, back end, or data engineering team, these guys are really expensive, this thing, and nothing should get waste when these guys develop it out. So I think that's how I this just reminded me that thought, what that founder was talking about. So that's where the developer first approach really means a lot, not only from the technology perspective, but also from the business perspective.
I think we can definitely safely say this, that security is like that feedback. And, you actually helped me to understand that cybersecurity as an afterthought, how much it can impact the business. And like you mentioned, engineering is the most expensive bandwidth. Like Sanjeev had shared about the cost factor, this is definitely another way to look at it. And I think you definitely pointed out something equally important about the misconfigurations. We say, cybersecurity itself is a people process technology problem. So definitely we have come across that about more than 70%, or maybe there are different reports, some also say 90% of these security gaps, breaches happen because of misconfigurations. So definitely this is another area where we can think by DevSecOps and shift left security. You also mentioned on, of course, the timely detection of threats, workload protection, and above all, cloud posture management, because we realize today adopting cloud is not just about operational efficiency, it's also about the business transformation. And I think we did unveil some of the jargons, which even I will, again listen to this recording to understand more on terms of the software composition, analysis, dynamic application testing, and many more. Thanks, I think quite extensive, amazing inputs from you, Kiran. Sanjeev, we have been discussing so much on the application and adoption, why shift left again. How do we actually start this journey? But, what are those first steps or those cornerstones that which will help us actually start adopting? Over to you, Sanjeev.
Thanks, Harsh. So I would start by first saying at strategic level, leadership level, we need to understand that the world has changed. And so the existing models also need to change. Some of them Kiran did highlight about, especially when moving to cloud, how things are more agile, more flexible, more modular, etc. And so those specific point in time security doesn't really work, right? And I would just like to point out something here. So even if you look at OWASP top 10, which highlights the top 10 vulnerabilities typically, you'll notice that in 2021, for the first time, they did introduce this new control or new type of vulnerability called insecure design, which never existed previously. Right? And that does highlight the fact that design does impact security of a product. And if you do compare it with, say, Hackers One's top 10, which they actually track how many those vulnerabilities, I mean, not vulnerability, but bug bounty hunters, etc., where do they go? Where are those bugs being found globally? And something like cross-site scripting is still right on top, right? You would imagine that over 20 years, everybody knows what is cross-site scripting, and they would do something to protect against it. And yet, that's the topmost in bug bounty. And then you still have things like SSRF, IDOR, which probably not many are even familiar with, and yet you'd find that these are where the maximum bugs are being found. Not many security people are aware of some of these things, right? So forget about application developers being aware of it. So really can't blame them if the application that is being developed does have some of these vulnerabilities. So my point is to first understand that there is a problem, accept there is a problem, and second, understand that we cannot shift the responsibility of security onto developers. We need to enable them, we need to help them, We need to make them aware of the repercussions of the decision that they take. Some of them Kiran highlighted which library to use. I mean, one of the common things is that for developer go pose a question on Stack Overflow and take the first answer, right? Or look at questions posted by others and take the something marked as answer without any concern about say security. So to make them first understand, and I think it starts from creating that awareness at all levels across the stack as to why security is important. And I think Kiran beautifully covered that there is a business impact now. Security is no longer just an isolated something to be done just to meet those compliance requirements, but there is a very, very definite business impact now. uh, Imagine Google going down for 10 minutes globally, or Azure platform going down for 10 minutes, right? It's crazy now to think the kind of reputation hit, the kind of revenue hit that you'll probably have because the application was not available for a few minutes or few hours during the year. So this is very, very important. And so the only way I see, so once you have the strategic piece in place, create the awareness, create that understanding as to say, right, how do we now do this? Instead of monolithic security testing at the end, which should continue, not to say it's not required, break it down into pieces, like Kiran was saying, as part of CI/CD pipeline, you now have continuous integration, continuous development, right? And when you use tools like SAS, pre-compile, go through the code, understand it, and allow the developer to proceed forward only if the code passes those set of checks that hopefully were created during the design phase itself, right? Once the code has been compiled, before you go ahead and deploy it, do the DAST check, which is to now do the runtime inspection of the code, etc. Now you're getting IAST, right? And once you're out in production, you would have a WAF or a RASP, which is again coming up through. So there are tools, there are technologies available now which enable you to first deploy these tools at the right phase in the development process and then automate, because that is the only way that security can actually improve the speed of the process. Sort of one monolithic test at the end wherein they may take days, weeks to clear the thing for production. If you have been testing it throughout the development life cycle, the final test, as soon as final test is done, your code is released for production, right? And if you also notice, this is the way the world is already moving to. Big ticket platforms like GitLab, GitHub, they are now bundling in a lot of these tools in an automated fashion for an automated SecDevOps or DevSecOps, however we may like to call it. And also for many organizations looking to move to the cloud native approach is very different from what traditional approach used to be, right? Now you have very easy, everything is as a code, right? So security also has to become as a code where you create templates, deploy it along with those, whether you're using, say, event hub, functions, containers. Since cloud, everything is code, deploy security as a code. So it becomes again fast, agile, embedded right into the development process within the tools that developers are using, so they don't feel out of the home, they don't have to deal with some other stuff to do or add on security as a band-aid at the end, right? And I think these are some of the approaches that we will hopefully see over the next few years, and maybe the developers will be happy.
I think I really love the mindset that Sanjeev, in fact, even Kiran has for this developer first mindset. That vibes is definitely very much visible. You know, having that thinking hat is really necessary to provide the solution. And like rightly said by Sanjeev, understanding and accepting the problem then becomes really critical. And I think we have, as an industry, started that, I guess, Sanjeev gave a very good example of OBEST 2020, where the insecure design actually explains the impact of the security of the product to the business. And at the same time, that as an industry, we are recognizing, this kind of Herculean problems. I mean, the problem that it can, the disaster it can create. And equally important is that, yes, we have to enable the developers, but shifting the responsibility of security to developers definitely is not the solution out here. Awareness of the security, a step-by-step approach, breaking it into pieces is definitely critical. And like very much mentioned, to have that speed, and Kiran mentioned about the human errors, automation. I think this is one of the reasons in last few years we are thankfully talking about cybersecurity and automation. It's not cybersecurity versus automation. I think this myth or break the bias has been already done few years back that way. And testing through the life cycle of software development, the criticality of it is definitely very important. And one of another solution being, deploying security as a code, which is, embedded right into the development. I think definitely this is how you kind of simplify it and integrate it. Definitely simplification, integration, and automation is the key to so many things. I think some very interesting, in fact, very comprehensive points, put down by Sanjeev into, how we can actually adopt shift left. And Kiran, Sanjeev, I must say some very interesting and much needed insights. But before we move forward, we actually had few questions. I thought I'll take it in the end. Let's, get into that also, and I can leave it to you. You can decide which questions can be answered by both of you. This is the question from Jagdishwaran. What are the key missing security elements while following agile process for application development?
I can take this. I think I did cover it up briefly. Like I mean to say whether this question is towards the platforms or the tools which we need to integrate. If that is the case, I think I was talking about when it comes to the open libraries coming from the available on the internet. I think the source code analysis is something which we really need to look at. And these all platforms nowadays are very easily integrated with the CI/CD pipeline. So you can make them all these solutions as part of your CI/CD pipeline workflow itself. Whether it's on the source code analysis perspective, I think that is another aspect which we can look at it. Other is the dynamic application testing. It from the CI/CD application. While if you look at from a runtime protection, and these are standard tools which we are still using in the traditional world as well. While with the obviously the AI and ML comes into picture to ensure that the latest threat vectors are also protected. So you can look at the WAF, web application platform, or anti-malware and all those tools, which are largely also part of the ecosystem. I think if there is any follow-up question, then I can take it up.
Jagdishwaran, would you like to add on something out here before we continue?
Just a little bit, which is to say, so while Kiran did talk about those tools, just wanted to highlight that no tool exists in the world to detect business flaws, right? And that's the biggest risk. So a notion of being secure, or rather a false notion of being secure just because we have these controls in place, should be avoided. And I think it's a very, very common mistake. Just because we have deployed SaaS, DAS, and these tools, people think we're secure. No, really. And especially modern softwares where you have a lot of these third-party libraries being pulled in at runtime, or embedded into the code, right? How do you ensure security of that? Because you don't control the code, right? And I'll take, I mean, trying to match Kiran's analogy numbers. Yeah, December log4j happened, right? And everybody who have been making software is scrambling to identify whether they were impacted or not. And if I remember correctly, it was some version 2.10 onwards were impacted. Versions below that were not impacted due to this RC bug. And so a couple of OEMs did come back and say, hey, we are not impacted because we are using version 1.4, right? And I mean, look at the irony here. I mean, 1.4 version was from 5 years back, so they never bothered to upgrade it. And then, I mean, unfortunately, I was consumer of one of those products and say, hey, why are you still using 1.4? Because you may not be impacted by Log4j, but version 1.4 also has its own RC, right? Though not as severe. They didn't have answers. And I think that is the reality today, right? You take in something third party, plug it in, never bother to look back as to what is happening to that piece of software. Right? So
That's a
irrespective of the approach,
catch 22 as well, in terms of whether if you're using an updated version, you are vulnerable. If you're using an older version, you're not.
absolutely. So I think irrespective of the model we pick, the fact still remains same, right? Security has to be part of every stage of application development, and that's the missing piece.
And I think Kiran, Sanjeev, you actually gave some very good real life examples and actually broke a lot of myths currently. Let me also take another question in the interest of time. We have the question from Mr. Surinder. He asked that developer uses code already available on the internet. I think that is very much we have discussed, and let's continue with the question. And it may be vulnerable. Could you please give some ideas how to tackle this or minimize the risk?
So I think Kiran already mentioned about this, the secure composition analysis, which is essentially looking at all dependency analysis, which is essentially looking at all dependencies during, I would say, the deployment phase or the integration phase, and highlights to the developer itself if they're using any vulnerable component in their code. Right? So something like that, the secure composition analysis, source composition analysis, that hopefully should help in this case.
We actually had one request for Kiran over here, which is not exactly for the session, but with that analogy coming of Russia and Ukraine, some of us are requesting, we can have a little more, discussion on this and continue that analogy.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific to add. That was just the news impact.
Yes, I think, and it was a very right impromptu response from your side. So I think we had some interesting questions, and we can definitely, you can mail us more questions on this. And
so Harsh, I'll add an analogy on the Russia-Ukraine thing.
Please, we would love to hear that. Yes.
Yeah, so while we are bombarded with 24/7 coverage on the physical war, now, if you remember going back to around 2014 onwards, Russia has been testing all its cyber weapons on Ukraine for very, very long, right? And one of the most devastating, I think till date, considered the most devastating attack is that NotPetya so-called ransomware. It was a Viper tool, not a ransomware. And how it did start, it was targeted at Ukraine, of course. And Russia did a supply chain attack on a tax software, which is used across Ukraine for submitting their tax returns every year. Right? So they embedded a malware within the tax software. I'm forgetting the name now. And that's how it spread through legitimate updates to everyone in Ukraine. Unfortunately, Maersk Shipping, the largest global shipping company, they had one server in Ukraine, got impacted. And because the network was flat, they got impacted globally, right? It is estimated that entire world's shipping got impacted by about 4 to 6% for months. Goods were just lying on ports because the entire Maersk IT systems had been wiped, no way to recover. Luckily, they had one Active Directory somewhere in Ghana in Africa, which at that time was shut down because of power failure. So from that, they started their rebuilding effort, which took a couple of months. They went out and bought laptops and desktops and servers all over the globe. And it is estimated that that attack cost about $10 billion in direct cost. forget the indirect, right? So that was an outcome, a global outcome to the world, and everybody in cyber defense remembers that WannaCry and NotPetya particularly because that was an attack by Russia on Ukraine and had a very, very big global impact.
Yes, Sanjeev, I think East Europe has impacted very badly before war.
Absolutely.
There was a huge cyber attack across East Europe when this activity was on. I think many companies have isolated East Europe from the other countries' servers just to avoid or maybe avoid the impact.
That is correct because there's at that time, 2016, the world was very, very flat. Thomas Friedman meant it in a different way when he wrote that book, but our networks were extremely flat. So once you got in, there was no restriction. And all MNCs, global companies, where even if the malware ended or entered the network in Europe, East Europe particularly, they spread out globally within no time. So yes, you're right. At that point of time, those companies who still had not been fully compromised, they started isolating Eastern European servers.
I think this discussion definitely, kind of reiterates that today cyber crimes is not just a full-fledged business. It's more of a cyber warfare. And, what we are living, the kind of times is nothing less than cyber tsunami itself. But yes, of course, not to just, get scared, but also hope we will be working together for this. Before we take the final takeaways, I think Sanjay, you had raised your hand. Would you like to take that up? Wanted to ask or share something?
So yeah, thanks Ash. Thank you Sanjeev and Kiran for the sharing the information. I can very much correlate the things from the when the session has started at 5 o'clock and the actual conversation started. And I can correlate each and everything which is talked about the containerization, source code review, vulnerability things, everything which we with my current experience where I'm working. Okay, so I can see that tech DevOps why it is important in the organization while building application because as he mentioned that we have to go apply with the application in a 30 days time. Okay, where the everything need to be take care. Okay, so I can correlate each and everything, and they have much more details. They have explained the everything. So I just wanted to thanks to them to sharing such information with us.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, and
Thanks,
for all
Sanjay.
those wonderful comments also that is coming in the chat box. Let us now quickly, have the final takeaways from our esteemed speakers. And I think this is a session recording which definitely I'm going to hear twice or thrice to actually, kind of understand all these critical terms. Let me take up Sanjeev, you first now, your final words and takeaways from the session.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I had lots of fun talking through this. Never felt like those three idiots in your advertisement campaign, right? So for once within this 1 year, the dev, sec, and ops work together. Thanks, Kiran, for a lot of insights. I got to learn a few new things from you today. Thank you for all the panel members. It was good fun for me. Hopefully there were some things that I shared that may be useful to some of you. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I'm sure the outcome or the landscape next couple of years will look very, very different. We have seen some of the early adopters already moving into DevSecOps or SecDevOps or some flavor of that. And starting to see results from this, right? Whether it be in terms of regular and flexible fast deployments or the quality of code or reduced number of attacks or reduced attack surface, reduced blast surface, etc. So on and so forth. So I'm sure it will see more and more adoption by others as we go forward. I'm quite hopeful. Thank you.
And we are equally hopeful, Sanjeev, that we will be able to, actually use all the learnings that we could get from you. Equal pleasure and fun for us, and a privilege, of course, for us. Great inputs from your side. And Kiran, let me also take you up before going ahead.
So thank you very much, Harsh, and everyone joining on this weekend. I think if you ask me, two takeaways which I can leave it, I think do security as a code, shift the ownership to empower the developing developers or the engineering team, since cybersecurity is a team sport. Second is organization needs to have a right visibility to detect the anomaly in the environment. So I think these are the due to the cloud adoptions and the velocity of the changes. I think these are the two critical takeaways I can leave the audience with.
Interesting. In fact, yes, I do agree. It's a team sport, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, and I think we really lived this sport today. So thank you so much, Kiran, for that. In fact, Kiran and Sanjeev, what a wonderful session packed with so many insights, great takeaways, and lovely analogies, creative ones at that. So thank you so much, and I've been well supported by all the members out here, Satish, Vijaya, and anyone important I may be missing out. Satish, your last words before we wrap up very quickly.
I think that this session was very interesting, and I think this is a never-ending kind of discussion. And actually, pandemic or maybe this Ukraine war has brought a war, physical war, to the cyber war now. Okay, you can see whether war is going to happen or not. We come to know by the kind of cyber attack taking place. So you will have always some fantastic news. So what was happening is earlier, good to have security. Today, it is necessary to have security, which will save our data, because for us, data is like a what you can say, a gold or platinum for us. And if it is saved, so whenever we keep talking about data, I keep telling that my mobile may get damaged, but if my data goes from my mobile, then it's high risk. Same way, when we actually work in this industry, for me, my desktop goes wrong, no issues, but recovery cost is always higher than the desktop cost. Okay, and we have to pay for the data. So whatever we are paying now for the security is not the security cost. We are trying to save the data through the security media. And it's not my responsibility or your responsibility, it's our responsibility to have this well set up. Because unless you educate people, I think security will not be successful.
Very much, Satish. In fact, I think you really summed up all the discussions about, of course, the awareness about how the security is actually going to save. So thank you so much for that, Satish. And once again, thank you, Sanjeev, Kiran, and all our wonderful, lovely CyberGurukul members for joining. We'll connect soon and have a good weekend.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Harsh.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
Satish. Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.